Hello, and welcome to the Grace podcast series. My name is Denise Brock, and I am the Operations Director for the Global Resource for Advancing Cancer Education, or GRACE. In this podcast series, we interview patients, advocates, and healthcare professionals to provide the most updated information for our community and to highlight important issues facing those dealing with a cancer diagnosis. We hope you find this information valuable. For questions or comments, please visit us at cancergrace.org.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jack West, and I'm a medical oncologist, an associate clinical professor with a focus on thoracic oncology, working at the City of Hope Comprehensive Cancer Center in the Los Angeles area. And I'm happy to be joined today by two of my colleagues who are also on the board of directors for GRACE, Global Resource for Advancing Cancer Education. I serve as the founder and president, but I'd like to welcome two of my colleagues to introduce themselves. If you can, maybe I can start with you, Jared, if you can.
Sure, I'm Jared Weiss. I'm also a thoracic oncologist at University of North Carolina.
Ben?
Ben Levy. I'm a thoracic medical oncologist at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and primarily based out of Washington, D.C.
Great. Do you, Ben, have a sense of how either you personally or Hopkins as an enterprise that is a few different campuses and settings are going to want to use telemedicine? Because I think in some of the numbers that I've seen at different institutions, there was a rapid surge of use when live in-person visits dropped off a cliff in March of almost exactly a year ago. So we're recording now in March 2021, and it's been almost exactly a year since we suddenly stopped and had to adapt. And for a period of time, 4-6 weeks, sometimes a little longer, the virtual visits were almost the only way to do it. And it was really learning on the fly. And then some of the numbers that I've seen are that the total number of visits in person and televisits have been rising, but are not up to where they were a year ago, or just before a year ago. And telemedicine has dropped off from its frantic use by necessity, but is still a component, maybe 20%, 30%.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it depends on your patient population. I think Jared brings up a great point that depends on how badly you need to do an exam versus, and also your patient population. Do they have the bandwidth literally? Do they have the hardware? Do they have the tech know-how? Because, I think if you're seeing a lot of younger patients with EGFR mutations who would otherwise have to take, a half day or more off of work just to confirm they're still doing great, that's a tailor-made for telemedicine. So what's your view, Ben, and what's Hopkins aspire to long-term beyond the time that we have to do it?
Yeah, I think you hit on some great points and you answered a lot of the questions. So I do have the data on this in terms of across the enterprise as of last week. And there's a lot of geographic variability, as you mentioned, and that geographic variability in telemedicine utilization is contingent on sort of the patient population we serve. So we look at an operation in DC, and my practice is a large number of EGFR and ALK and driver mutation. The telemedicine utilization for us, and not only me, but for our other disciplines, is around 25 to 30%. You look at a campus like JHH, a little bit different patient population, a little bit more of a mix socioeconomically, and the telemedicine utilization is around 10 to 15%. So it really depends. It gives you what our catchment area is. It's varied, but certainly there are differences based on where we are located. So I think that the question still remains. You ask a question that I've asked to leadership on these committee calls we have is, what is the overall vision moving forward? how will this be utilized? What are the financial implications? What are the patient, coordination implications? I mean, these are unfortunately some of the things we have to ask when we're talking about leveraging telemedicine post-pandemic. I think it's going. So Hopkins has not really had a formalized decision on this and how it's going to move forward. I certainly think there's going to be an opportunity to keep it in play. I think it's ignorant to think that there's not going to be a role for telemedicine for some of our patients. But I don't know how this will shake out, and if there's going to be a bold statement from any institution that we need to do X amount of telemedicine. I mean, I asked this question on the call last week with our institution, with the leaders of each of the sites, is, what is the message to the physicians at our sites? Is it bring patients back now, it's safe, or is it you need to see X amount of telemedicine? And I don't think there is a right message here. I think that telemedicine will have a play. I will tell you that I'm making every effort to bring patients back. I have found challenges with telemedicine that relate to coordination of care that I alluded to before with multiple patients, but I think others may find use in it. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm interested in both of your impressions about just what you perceive, what you hear from colleagues, because my sense it's just quite varied. There are many who find they have less support than in the live setting, and there's more moving parts, more cracks for people to fall through in terms of follow-up, et cetera. And as much as I'm a fan of the concept, I think that the reality is that we have had, decades to centuries of time to work on our bedside manner and just how you do in-person medicine. We were thrown into the deep end very quickly in how to do telemedicine, and we haven't perfected any of this. Our website manner is still being worked on in terms of, look at the camera and don't answer email while you're talking with the patient, and but also just the platforms are not infallible right now. But I also think that doesn't mean that they won't get better, because this is a very quick, steep potential learning curve, and we haven't had much time to optimize the user experience. But I'm just interested, do you sense that most of your colleagues, because Jared, I think you're also somebody who, if they have their druthers, would strongly prefer to have the interpersonal connection in the room. Do you feel that is reflective of the vast majority of your colleagues, or that there's an enormous spectrum of telemedicine, favoring folks versus those who are more traditionalists about you got to palpate the spleen?
You don't need to palpate the spleen. In fact, most of us couldn't palpate a spleen, even with an enlarged spleen, let's be honest. And when we PET scan our patients every 20 minutes, it's okay. I was laughing while you were speaking earlier, just so you don't think I'm laughing at you. You were talking about, getting this all down, not checking email. Just on Monday, I was on with a patient, fortunately a patient I know well, and my twins came in, sat on my lap, said hello, and asked if they could have a snack. This is part of doing telemedicine at home. It can be as therapeutic as it can be disruptive, but that's why I was laughing. But I'm not
sure, is that a bad thing to humanize? Because no. I think that one of the arguable upsides of this is you get to see the patient in their home environment, you learn about them. And also, I think we touched on maybe in some prior discussions, right now, if we're still restricting who can come in with them, being able to have their family around them at home versus nobody else, and they're wheeled in a wheelchair by some stranger, I think is suboptimal. But get back to you.
So I really agree. There are advantages here, right? In this comic example, maybe I didn't amuse as much as I meant to, but it amused my patient, right? And I will shamelessly exploit cute children to cheer up cancer patients. I've done it before, I'll do it again. And it actually wasn't a bad thing in this situation. But there's another upside that I want to comment upon, which is that, we were talking about volumes before. Like Dr. Levy, I carefully track the volumes in my group. I do it on a monthly basis compared to year before, and we're actually up compared to pre-COVID. And in diving into what drives that, The difference is an increase in video-based consultative services. And so I live in a state that is quite large, where, patients may be 3 hours from an academic center. And what I'm seeing from my community partners is that more patients, a higher percentage of lung cancer patients, are getting an academic consult. And I think that's a good thing, right? So I saw a patient in practice where, that was described as having had EGFR, had been on osimertinib as frontline, was described as having a molecular with no actionable nothing actionable there, but there was C797S without T790M. That's just one example, but maybe the next patient, I have a trial for them. The patient after, maybe there's a standard of care recommendation. But if you believe that we have something legitimate to offer our community partners and our patients in an academic consultative practice, then at least having one-offs or occasional touch points is a beneficial thing. And not every patient, even pre-pandemic, wanted to drive hours to get to one of us. There are many people who might benefit from that, but weren't going to do it before that. Now that we're in a video era where that's available, are doing it. There are barriers to this. There are people with bad internet, but there are solutions around that. I had a consult a few weeks ago that was a poorer patient, but did have a smartphone. And they were sitting in the parking lot of their local library having a video consult. Now, it's not elegant. I'm sure nobody from UNC would ever let me put that on marketing material or as a suggestion. But do I think that was a good thing for that patient? I do. So I think the evolution of the availability of video medicine, not only for our mutated patients who have bandwidth and less need for exam and such, but also for some patients who wouldn't have hit the threshold to get to us, but might benefit. I see that as a permanent advantage, as a legitimate silver lining that COVID has brought us in introducing more of the video era. Now, before getting online here, the three of us were talking about the issues of licensing and cross-state movement. And I think all of that really needs to be addressed and solved. If there's a patient in North Carolina who wants a consult from Jack West, I think that should be a thing. I think that patient should be able to do that. I think there's a potential advantage to it in terms of care. And I think it's consistent with our capitalist values as a country. Whatever you believe in them, those are kind of our core values. So I think we need to address some of these licensing issues to give patients access to consultative services wherever they so choose.
I just want to piggyback one thing. I agree with Jared fully. I think he elegantly stated some of the advantages, what I call community outreach of telemedicine, or expanding our area that and our expertise, not only for just routine scenarios where there may be questions, but we've had some success ramping up our clinical trial portfolio and reaching clinical trials to some of these patients who would otherwise not travel in. At least you can't sign the consent on the first visit, although we're working on that.
But you can get them to know that it exists, right?
Present it as an option. Exactly. Get them to know that it exists. And we've had some success recently, and it's been a win for the patient. And some of this is a political navigation with the primary oncologists, to make sure that they are still involved when you're talking to patients that you're seeing from 90 miles away about a trial that requires them to come in every other week or every 3 weeks. But, this is, I think, one of the advantages that I think will stick around. It's not only a win for good patient care, it may be a win for, enhancing patients, enhancing the accrual on a clinical trial.
I agree really strongly. I mean, right, there are a lot of patients who get diagnosed inpatient at UNC, and the right thing for their values is local care. And I happily refer them to get their Pembro locally. There are other patients who are distant who want to at least know what all of their options are. And I think, not every patient, a trial isn't right for every patient, but if they're eligible, every patient should at least know the options that exist for them so they can consider it in parallel with their local standard of care options.
Thank you again for joining us. This podcast was made possible by the generosity of sponsorship from our friends at Lilly and Exelexis. Please like and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Send us feedback, share your story, donate, and visit us for more information at cancergrace.org. Thank you for listening.